Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Inclusive Spaces seminar series at the Bartlett, the Faculty of Built Environment here at UCL. Today, you have joined the October edition of Inclusive Spaces. My name is Sara Motwani, and I'm a second-year student studying Engineering and Architectural Design, MEng, at the Bartlett School of Architecture. So a bit about me, I am Indian and I was born and raised in India. So my first introduction to the built environment was through that of my city, New Delhi. The building you can see behind me is actually one of my favorite buildings in New Delhi. It's the Jama Masjid. So you can see that the ethnic diversity of Delhi allowed me to witness the coexistence of diverse structures from numerous religions. We actually have all three masjids, temples, and churches in a 1 kilometer radius in Delhi. And hence, coming from a diverse and secular country played a very important role in instilling the values of inclusivity in me. So now about Islamophobia and how it relates to me. The partition of India continues to remain one of the darkest moments in its history. The country experienced a traumatic display of communal violence that stemmed from religious abhorrence between the Hindus and the Muslims. As an offshoot, my grandfather and his whole family had to flee the country they knew and called home. And this incident is what caused and continues to be the cause of many instances of Islamophobia in my country, and is also the reason why I feel so connected with the issue, and hence would like to discuss it further with special emphasis to my passion, which is the built environment. So for your information, this session will be recorded and added to the faculty YouTube channel, Bartlett EDI website, and forwarded to registered attendees. We encourage you all to submit a question for the speaker at any point during this lecture by clicking on the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. You can submit your own question or upvote the question of others. We will hear the presentation for the first half of the session, and we will begin the Q&A in the second half before we end at 2 p.m. That is if we don't overrun by a bit. Okay. So yeah, in reading about Islamophobia in the built environment, I came across Dr. Ali's paper, which was published in 2011, and it was called Mosquephobia, the Dilemma of Architecture, Multiculturalism, and Islam. The paper defined Moscophobia as a rejection and resistance of the powerful and dominating image of the mosque, particularly in the West. And you can see how in the paper mosques have been described to be used potentially as a tool in the present day to overcome Islamophobia, and how mosque design can be used to counter the question of the Islamic community being resistant to integrate with Western culture. So without any further delay, I would like to introduce Ali. So Professor Ali is an architect, urban designer, and planner interested in research and practice in the domain of theory, criticism, and creativity in architecture and urbanism. He writes extensively in newspapers, periodicals, and architectural magazines locally and internationally, and has published more than 130 journal-referred papers, critical reviews, essays, numerous papers and conference proceedings, in addition to books and book chapters. His current research interests are knowledge-based urban development, post-carbon contemporary Gulf cities, museums in the Gulf, urban vitalization of historic districts, knowledge and creative cities, and he has been invited to present his research work at international institutions in over 30 countries. I'm not now going to give the floor over to Ali.
Thank you, Sarah. Can you please allow me to share the screen? Awesome. I think by now you can see my full screen. Is this right, Sarah? Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you also for the invitation. It's a great honor to be part of a school and a faculty that I'm literally learning from, the vitality of the place, the diversity, and the amount of knowledge and inspiration coming from Bartlett and the School of Architecture and the Faculty of Built Environment is quite amazing. As you said, Sarah, I started almost a decade ago to be excited about the notion of how we as architects and urban designers and planners can provide an answer for the accelerating phenomena of Islamophobia. And then I also coined the term Mosquephobia because I also realized in the process of finding a role for us that also what we are doing in terms of our contribution to the built environment might also add positively to the acceleration process. And therefore, I want to start with sharing with you my fundamental questions regarding the issue. I want to also share a bit of conceptual inquiry and my interpretation of the evolution of Islamophobia and then the emergence of Moscophobia. And then I want to go also through some interesting regional and global cases. And when I say regional, I'm talking basically about the Middle East and some of the other Muslim communities. One of the interesting questions that I was all the time posing in front of me when I do visit museums of Islamic arts is the notion of, are we frozen in a specific time frame? Wherever you go and visit a museum of Islamic art, every component, every exhibit is telling you that the creativity of Muslims, the contribution of Muslims to culture and art and so on, was only limited to a specific time frame. But all the museums of Islamic art, they don't have a contemporary section, or most of them. And to me, that was a sort of a manifestation of another question. Do we belong to the contemporary course when we say that we are Muslim artists, Muslim architects, Muslim urbanists, and Muslim creators in general? How to create a space and a place for us in the contemporary discourse? Also, I wanna tackle the notion of what I call the dynamic interpretation of identity, because I think one of the major forces that led the Muslim communities, particularly in the Middle East, to resort to a specific era in their history is the notion of, we want to look at one single chapter of our history and consider it representing our identity. And therefore, we are not that much subscribed to the multi-layered approach to construct contemporary identity. Because if I will look at a country and a city that I live in now, Doha, Qatar, and I would question which building exactly is a representation of Qatar identity. Its heritage, the forts, the old souk, the old architecture, or also the new additions to the urban fabric of the city, which is suggesting a new paradigm in its urbanity based on the notion of knowledge-based urbanism, cultural centers, museums, universities, and so on and so forth. So one of the main line of thoughts that I'm excited about is the notion of how we move from focusing on interpreting identity as a solid, frozen part of our history to a more dynamic interpretation that would allow us to look at what is happening now and what we are contributing with now as also one addition or one dimension or one more chapter added to the narrative of Muslim identity. Another idea, particularly when it comes to the design of mosques, is related to the element of time and how the architecture is representing its contemporary condition. This is a very famous composition of Cairo, Sultan Hassan Mosque and the Al-Rifai Mosque. And the two mosques, they have plenty of time difference, but yet the expression of the mosque is almost identical, as if we have very straight jacket, particularly for the building types of mosques. And we are trapped in this jacket. We are trapped in the specific visual components like the minarets, the dome, the arches, and so on and so forth. And then by keep on using those elements, suddenly the element of time is becoming neglected, is becoming marginalized, because if you keep on using the same element with almost the same materials, you don't know exactly if it's old and new. Amazing installations was done in Vancouver Biennale in 2018, and the installation was called Paradise Has Many Gates. And I love the installation because it was actually asking the right question in an incredibly profound symbolic manner. You're talking about a mosque which is becoming a cage, but at the same time, it's very transparent. So if you look at the upper picture to the left, Muslims are trapped in this mosque as if they are punished by being Muslims. But on the other hand, if you look at the lower picture, those people are sitting in a very peaceful manner, changing ideas and changing speeches and so on and so forth. So here comes the notion of perception. Perception is becoming fundamental part of how we interpret the meaning of architecture, particularly when it comes to Islam and mosques. And what is interesting also about the architecture of Muslim communities or Islamic architecture, what have you, is that when you look at how it was documented in most of the books tackling history of architecture, you will see that it was basically a historical account. If you see the work of Fletcher, Spio Kostov, Michel, all of them dealt with Islamic architecture basically from a historical account, as if, again, it was a domination and a manifestation of exactly the point that worried me the most, which is, are we only good when it comes to recite our history, but when we look at our contemporary moment, we failed to construct a very solid creative position? This is one of my favorite survey of Islamic architecture. It's called An Illustrated History of Islamic Architecture. But what I like about this book, that he kept on talking about in the introduction, he kept on talking about the beauty of old mosques, madrasas, bazaars, courtyards, and so on and so forth. But suddenly, when he started to move towards the contemporary time, he talked about, or the book talked about, today's modern Dubai skyscrapers, as if when it comes to the modern condition, we cannot find anything but to talk about modern Dubai skyscrapers as the representation and the illustrated manifestation of Islamic architecture. And therefore, I think there is a sort of a dilemma here, in my opinion. And this dilemma is related to the mosque is a very unique building typology. It's a physical representation of the governing ideology. It's about sacred speciality. But I think also it should, and it also represents evolving community and dynamic identity. And to me, this is fundamentally important, because as it is a building type, and it is a representation of a relation between a specific community members, and it's also about spiritual and sacred relations. It should evolve, it should change, it should be subjected to a creative process that would help the mosque to be developed physically, spiritually, and architecturally. And this is why the narrative that I am suggesting today is basically a narrative about how to use the mosque as a platform to investigate the relation between the building and the context. And the context here, I mean cultural context, social context, urban and architectural, and so on and so forth. Because if we dealt with the mosque as an independent building only for the practice of rituals, totally divorce it from the context and culture and social and so on and so forth, we might accept the fact that the mosque is a space with the specific elements like the minarets and the dome and so on and so forth, and we'll keep on repeating it for the rest of our lives, for the rest of humanity. But if we started to make the connection between the mosque and the context, particularly the culture and the social, and we know that culture is changing, the society is changing, then we have to have different alternatives. And therefore, I'm trying to share with you this kind of alternative, how to shape a different position and proposition regarding the value of architecture in designing the mosque, and how to make the mosque more relevant to our contemporary time, to our contemporary values. And this would be valid in both Western and Eastern contexts. This is a very important and very crucial and very profound image in my mind. This is from the Masjid Kabir in Lahore, Pakistan. And I think the beauty of this picture, I mean, literally, I can end the lecture here, because the beauty of this lecture is telling the whole, in its ability to tell the whole story, the whole alternative that I'm talking about. How to transform the mosque into a destination, into a fun place, into a place where people feel interesting sense of belonging, different sense of belonging. This is not a space where you just go for rituals. You don't go only for salah and you leave, but this is a place where you are subscribing to it. You feel that this is part of your identity. This is part of your life. If you are part of the youth, if you are an elderly, if you are a family, the mosque is your place. The mosque is your space. And I think we were subjected in the last decade, 2 decades, to what I call it a scary journey from Islamophobia to what I've coined the Mosquephobia. And Islamophobia emerged as a very, very strong ideology. And it actually was totally threatening the essence of Islam, which is tolerance, because tolerance is embedded in the core principles of Islam. So the notion of to start a wave throughout different parts of the world, suggesting that Islam is a problem and Muslims are a problem and Muslims are terrorists is becoming really painful for all of us. Not only that, what I was also excited about while considering the different parts of my research is that Islamophobia, I came to the conclusion that it was globally and locally constructed, and it was globally and locally consumed. This is very interesting because I am not a subscriber to the theory of conspiracy, but I do know from different literature that Islamophobia emerged, but it was also constructed globally by a lot of dictators around the Middle East and other Muslim countries, and I will elaborate on that. And it was also globally consumed to portray an image about Islam and Muslims, but at the same time, that was also used internally. So one of the very interesting quotes from Obama that when he gave a very interesting speech in Cairo, and he was talking about that Islamophobia actually give a sort of a very bad impression about Islam and made countries and important countries like America started to have a very bad perception about how to view Islam as hostile and also how to relate this to notions like human rights and how to create more fear and more mistrust against Muslims. But what is interesting is that also from the West, you can hear other voices that would illustrate for us that Islamophobia is used as a tool, as I previously said, the notion of constructed and consumed, the Islamophobia industry, how to make Muslims the enemy, and so on and so forth. And in all of these books and all of these publications, some dignified authors were trying to alert us that the problem is not about Islam. The problem is not about Muslims. but the process of manipulations, the process of how to use such a phenomena to help a specific dictator or to help a specific regime or to help a specific process of controlling a country or community. But what is really important for us as architects and urbanists is that this kind of fear resulted in a new form of fear, which I called it the Mosquephobia. Because in the process of rejecting Islam and rejecting Muslims, there was no concrete evidence of the presence of Muslims and Islams in different contexts around the world rather than mosques. And therefore, most of the European cities and also a lot of American states, they have witnessed demonstrations where one of the very important signs that were used all over the place with no more Muslims, no more mosques, no more Islamic centers. But to me, what was very, very interesting in all of these processes is that the kind of graphics that was used are exactly the same elements that we kept on doing for every single mosque that we built. And I'm talking here about domes, I'm talking about arches, I'm talking about minarets. So as if the message is this kind of visual vocabulary, this kind of visual message, we need to stop it, because this message is so much related to the notion of the mosque and Islam. I talked about how the Islamophobia was also consumed locally. This is, excuse me, this is a very interesting example of how you shape the collective conscious. This is an example from Cairo, Egypt, where they were broadcasting on the Egyptian TV a drill for fighting terrorists. And this training drill, they used a mock-up on the shape of a mosque. So you're talking about one of the biggest Muslim countries in the world. You're talking about the city of 1,000 minarets. And suddenly you are delivering a message again that the mosque is the center of terrorism. Muslims are the responsible for terrorism. And this is happening in the heart of Cairo, in the heart of Islamic world. This is again very, very interesting to reflect on. Excuse me, because it's again suggesting the idea of the local consumption of Islamophobia and the local construction of Islamophobia. And this very first wave of Moscophobia was so much manifested in the rejection of the Park 51 Islamic Community Center in New York, blocks away from the ground zero, but yet, because of the fact that this is a design dedicated for Islamic community center, although the architecture, as you can see to the left-hand side, it's a very, very modern architecture with a very interesting kind of geometry, nothing that would resemble the classical elements that I talked about, the dome or the minaret or what have you, are there. But yet, the fact that this is an Islamic center give a lot of people in New York the legitimacy to reject the project. Not only that, how also the project was interpreted as a center for terrorism. And they were making jokes in a lot of excellent papers in the US, including the New York Times, suggesting that this will be the control centers for more terrorist attacks. So I think we are in a sort of a defining moment, because historically, Muslim communities were doing an excellent balance between their faith and the diversity of the different geographies and communities and cultures and political systems. You have mosques scattered all the way from Morocco to the Gulf and from China to South Africa. And wherever you go, you will see that the culture, the geography, the politics, the economy, the way of life of people dramatically changed the appearance and the role and the way the mosques were designed and constructed. In our contemporary time, we are suffering. We are suffering because we are in a challenging time. We need to express that we are not terrorists, we are not hostile, we are civilized people that also seeking peace and seeking harmony. And we have to fight because we have incredibly shattered image. And to me, what is interesting is that mosque particularly was a manifestation of social and cultural and artistic context, because it was a place where the creativity of Muslims will be emphasized. It was a place where the notion of beauty would be manifested. And beauty in Islam is absolutely interesting concept, because in Islam, you talk about the perfect beauty, al-jamal al-kamil. You're talking about visible beauty, and therefore the appearance is very important, al-jamal al-zahir, how you will create continuous message for people where they will enjoy being engaged in a very profound, beautiful experiences. And at the same time, you have inner or invisible beauty, al-jamal al-batin, where you will really reflect and contemplate and have the opportunity to do a sort of meditation, to be able to feel this kind of inner beauty. And therefore, the mosque was a representation of this al-jamal al-kamil, how you combine al-jamal al-zahir and al-jamal al-batin in an architectural space. And that was done through a lot of absolutely wonderful concepts, but at the same time, all of these concepts were not standardized. We did the standardization in our modern time, but before that, geometry, form, the quality of light, different patterns, calligraphy, the use of water, all of these patterns and elements and design principles were so open to the unlimited creativity of Muslim architects, all the way, as I said, from Morocco to the Gulf, and from China and Iran all the way to Africa. So you see the flooring and the ceilings and the geometrical orders, the notion of light and again geometry, the relation between the in and out, and this kind of tapestry between light and dark, and calligraphy, of course. All of these elements were used in an incredible manner to achieve a space by which Muslims would feel the outer beauty and the inner beauty. Another very interesting dimension is related to the concept of creativity. And this would take me back to how I started the lecture, when I kept on questioning myself in all of the museums of Islamic art. Where is the creativity of Muslim artists and architects? Why we are not contributing to our contemporary time? Islam is telling us we have to be creative. The essence of Islamic art and architecture is about creativity, because in the spiritual interpretation of creativity, art is a connection to God. So a Muslim artist, a Muslim architect, a Muslim painter, a Muslim calligrapher, in the process of doing his creative work, he's actually trying to connect to God, and therefore his work is almost sacred, and hence to limit the creativity or to stop the creativity or to say that we excelled only on the Umayyad period or the Mamluk period, or we have to keep on doing one more Sultan Hassan, and we cannot do any fundamental, profound, substantial creative work in our contemporary time. I think this is a fundamental mistake. And if you do a quick survey about what I was trying to say, the diversity of architecture, the diversity of spaces, the diversity of building materials, the diversity of geometry, all of this is suggesting that in different places in the Middle East, in the Muslim world, from Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, all the way to Morocco, to Damascus, to Cairo, plenty of evidences suggesting that creativity was the name of the game, and Muslim architect was so obliged to the fact that although I am designing a mosque with the same function, but still I can use my creativity to come up with a new entity in the urban fabric of the Muslim city that would attain the beauty that I'm looking for. And also in some parts of the Muslim world, you will see what I would call it the timeless qualities versus the timeless image. This is very important because it seems to me that in Sultan Hassan, for instance, the very famous mosque in Cairo, Egypt, when you look at the main courtyard and you see the place for doing ablution, the wudu, I would say that this is a timeless quality that you need to preserve, but we shouldn't transform it into a timeless image that we have to copy and paste. And I think this is a fundamental difference that I was looking for. Also, there's something interesting about the relation between the mosque and the community and the notion of knowledge, because knowledge was manifested in different spaces within the Muslim city, in the masjid, in the madrasa, in the kulliya, in the souq, in the khans, and so on and so forth. All of these places were places for education, for knowledge transfer, for debates, for globalized culture, traders and intellectuals coming from different parts of the world, and they gather. Human exposure also was attained. So all of these roles, the deep understanding of the relation between the building and the knowledge dissemination was also manifested in an excellent manner. Also, I think what was interesting is what I called it the triology of the mosque, the saha, which is the open space, and the souq, which is the market. Again, this is a very interesting triology that was an essential part of any Muslim community or any Muslim city. A building, the most important building, which is the mosque, the public space, and the market. But this is also suggesting that the mosque was not only for rituals. The mosque, when it's connected to a public space, it's connected to a market, it's the center of the city. It is the center of the community. It's where places meet and talk and discuss and celebrate and get into intellectual discourse and so on and so forth. So this is again alerting us to that was the past. If we need to look at the past, we need to look at the principles of the past, not the images of the past. The past is telling us that the mosque was the center of the city, the center of the community. Not only the notion of the mosque was characterized by a dome and a minaret and a couple of arches. The mosque was incredibly alive in its internal spaces and alive in its edges. And I think Al-Azhar Mosque is an excellent representation of that, how the mosque was a very vibrant space inside and outside, and it was depicted in a lot of photos and a lot of paintings. And you go again all over the cities in the Muslim world, and you will see that the souqs, because they were so interacted with the mosque, became also an extension of this vibrancy of the city. So it seems to me that we have a fundamental creativity crisis, and we need to be confrontational when it comes to how to deal with this. Because do I have evidences to say that we do have a contemporary creativity crisis? Those are images that I took from different cities around the Middle East, from contemporary mosques. And you would question how the contemporary cities, where within their fabric, they have examples like Sultan Hassan, like Al-Ghuri Wikala, like Masjid Mu'ayyad, like Masjid Al-Qaryawan, and so on and so forth. They will end up with this kind of architecture. an architecture that at sometimes you would question how these additions were even legitimacy. What is the legitimacy of adding all of these to the urban fabric of different cities around the Middle East? This is an interesting example where they decided to have the Kaaba right in the heart of the mosque. So sometimes you even question the rationale and to which extent if this is a serious process or somebody's making fun, as if designing a mosque is becoming a sort of a game rather than a very spiritual exercise. Another interesting phenomenon that I want to share with you also is becoming really interesting in the Middle East is the notion of the mega mosques. And I don't know why it's so much associated, or at least I think I know, but it's so much associated with dictators. All of them, without exceptions, they are excited about huge mosques because they want to deliver again a message that we are representative of God, and we have a very, very moral commitment towards Islam. This is the case of Saddam Hussein in Iraq. This is the case of Ali Saleh in Yemen. Huge mosques, and all of these mosques are not related to how the local community is suffering, how people are really in a dire need for such a budget to be allocated for the uplifting and the community development. This is in UAE, Sheikh Zayed Mosque. This is one of the very interesting examples in a new desert development in Cairo called the New Capital. And ironically, they built the mosque in the middle of the desert, so no one is going there. They called it the biggest mosque in the Middle East. And then they were not able to get people to pray there. So they started to bring soldiers from different military camps around the area, and they will put them in buses every Friday so they can give the illusion that the mosque is packed with people. Even in Kaaba, the most sacred space for Muslims on earth, this is how a lot of painters were sort of portraying the notion of the dominance of Kaaba, how Kaaba is the center of the rituals of Al-Hajj or Umrah. And this is a picture, an old photographic picture suggesting also the same concept that the Kaaba is the dominating component of the whole Hajj or Umrah journey. And this is a contemporary image now. This is from one of the tall towers, the Fairmont Hotel, and the gentleman here is overlooking the Kaaba. This is a book that I wrote in Arabic, and I was comparing the urban development around Kaaba with what is happening in Las Vegas, because I found a lot of similarities in terms of transforming the context of Kaaba, not to deal with it as a spiritual context, but as a real estate paradise. And therefore, you build the highest and you build the biggest to gain as much profit as you can. And this is the situation now. Here are the mega buildings that are constructed all over the place. And this is the Kaaba is becoming really a tiny space in this jungle of concrete towers. And then when we go to the West, we are doing the same. So instead of trying again to speak to the context, we came and impose what I called it a sort of impose a specific image. I totally see the point of saying that we want to express being Muslims in the West. We want to say that we are part of the community. But at the same time, I think the notion is not to impose elements that were not generated from the context. Architecture is about dialogue. Architecture is about speaking to the context. This is a very, very interesting example. I think it's very similar to what Sarah started the presentation with. And again, you would realize that, no, it is not in India, it is not in Cairo, it is not in Saudi Arabia. This is the Islamic Center of America in Dearborn, Michigan. And again, I would question why we have to do that, why we have to use the same elements that were invented hundreds of years ago and duplicated. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of hope from young architects and urbanists. They are doing a lot of experimental work, and some of them were able to build their work also. This is what is called the vanishing mosque. And the idea here is to transform the mosque into a sort of a public space rather than a very solid, independent individual space. This is also another very interesting experience where the minimalist approach with a bit of abstraction for the main shapes, like in the case of the minaret, or the absence of the dome, and also emphasizing more on the using of natural light and the idea of how the simplicity of the inner spaces would create more spirituality is also examined in a very interesting manner in this mosque. One of my favorite example, Ali Alraouf Mosque in Dhaka, Bangladesh, designed by my friend Marina Tabassum, and it's a winner of the Aga Khan Award for Architecture in the cycle 2014-2016. And I like the mosque because it's simple and it's creative, and it fits the environment. It speaks to the people that are suffering from a specific level of poverty, very, very simple people. This is what they can afford. But I think the beauty of what Tabassum was able to do is to use her own creativity to end up with a mosque that it's different, that it's unique, that it's contemporary, and at the same time, very, very spiritual. These are different spaces within the experience of the mosque. Another very interesting example also in Jakarta, Indonesia, Said Naum Mosque, also a winner of the Aga Khan, where the mosque was also a representation of the vocabulary of the city rather than the imposed vocabulary from the history of mosques. And hence, the mosque is becoming a sort of blending with the urban context. Not only that, but the mosque partially is a representation of the triology that I talked about: the mosque, the public space, and the market. And therefore, the mosque created an interesting sense of belonging because it's becoming the park and the mosque. And people are going to the park and going to the mosque and going to the mosque and enjoying the park. And this is exactly what I'm calling for. And at the same time, you still see the creativity of the architect using very little budget, but still being able to enhance the quality of the design to attain the inner beauty and also the external beauty. Another interesting example in Singapore, Siaf Mosque, and I think again the notion of the reinvention of using the natural light. As I said before, natural light was a wonderful element in most of the traditional mosques, but we were not in the way we design mosques in our contemporary time. We were not that much excited about the element of light, but we were more excited about the visual elements like the dome and the minaret and so on. I think here it's a very interesting example of how to use the natural light to create a spiritual experience. One of my favorite examples in the West is the Binsberg Mosque in Bavaria, Germany. And what I really like about this mosque is this transparent, very transparent facade, a facade that would make a connection between the mosque and the community, that would invite people walking by to come and to see this space. And even the entrance, as you can see in the middle picture, is also inviting people. You see the minaret here again is a calligraphy articulated in a very, very interesting manner. So suddenly the mosque is not ambiguous place. It's not a place where it's surrounded by a stone wall and you don't know what is happening there. No, the mosque is open and transparent, and therefore you see that people are praying, people are wonderful, people are simple and peaceful. And another interesting creative contribution from Croatia, and again, you see the element of light, you see the composition, you see the revisit of the shape of the minaret. All of this we should give credit to all of these architects because they were able to write new chapter about the role of the mosque and the design of the mosque. And also they have an interesting understanding of how the mosque should play a role with the community and with the society. This is another interesting example in Turkey, in Istanbul, the Sankalar mosque in Istanbul, where the whole idea is about spirituality is a journey. And therefore, you will invite people coming to pray to go into this journey all the way under very interesting platforms and landscape. And they will end up in this space where natural light again is penetrating the space. The minaret is basically a piece of art with Allahu Akbar on top of it. And this is the journey that people would lead people to the mosque, and then they will come back to enjoy the vast landscape. This is the level of creativity that we should celebrate. Another interesting example in Tirana, Albania, where, and I think these two conceptual sketches are fundamentally important. This is the out space, this is the plaza, this is the saha, and this is the mosque. And I think that, even according to my lecture, that was the traditional principle of the relation between the mosque and the plaza. In Tirana, Albania, in this specific case, they called it the new mosque, the Islamic Center, and the Museum of Religious Harmony. The idea was to create an open space surrounded by the different kind of spaces, helping the center, the museum, and the mosque. And therefore, you are in the mosque and outside the mosque. You are within the sacred spaces and you are out of the sacred spaces to a communal spaces. And I think making all these lines kind of blurred helped to transform the mosque into a public space, helped again to create a different kind of sense of belonging. And people are enjoying the place as a place to pray, and enjoying the place as a place to get together, to hang out, to read, to have coffee, and so on. Absolutely a beautiful piece. A final case from Cambridge, designed again by my friend Julia Barfield. And it's absolutely a manifestation of creativity of everything. Even from the moment you approach the mosque, you feel that you are getting into a garden. You feel that you are getting into a space where from its reception is telling you, we are together, we are a community, we are a peaceful people. And very similar to the concept of the mosque in Germany, also the notion of transparency, the notion of a very blurred line between in and out, is also helping in absorbing people and inviting people and inviting the community to look at Muslims from not only a positive perspective, but also it's a manifestation of their ability to be creative. It was interesting that in my dialogue with the designer, she told me that the donors, the people who donate money, they insisted, although they enjoyed everything, they enjoyed the reception garden, they enjoyed the beauty of the internal spaces and exterior spaces, but they were so afraid that without using one of those typical elements, people might not recognize it as a mosque. So they insist on having this dome on top of the building. My very final example, which is related to the college where I teach at here in Qatar, and I just want to share with you how some professors of architecture describe the building. It looks like a spaceship. It's not settled on the ground. It will fly, and so on and so forth. And they were talking about this. They were talking about the College of Islamic Studies and the Education City mosque in Doha, Qatar. And in my opinion, it's more a revive of the idea of the Islamic concept of college or school, the kulliyah. It's also a contemporary representation of identity. It achieved the triology between the mosque, human knowledge, and interesting interpretation of creativity. You have also the notion of the public space and how the public space is related to the mosque. How to use architecture as a tool to question things, to provoke the community, how to use the building as an educational tool. It's not a replica of what people are used to see, but it's giving them the opportunity to question things. This is the flow spaces of the mosque and the different components of the kulliyah, the library, the exhibition halls, the lecture rooms, the educational facilities, professors' offices, and so on. This is one of the semi-internal courtyards, and this is when the place is packed with people after praying. And these are the two abstracted minarets, suggesting again a new interpretation for the design of the mosque. This is the main prayer hall, and as you can see, a very, very interesting composition of geometry, natural light, artificial light, and so on. And this is when it's packed with prayers, how the mosque is blending with the context. The main pillars of the mosque are 5, and they are representing the 5 pillars of Islam with calligraphy, and each of those verses are again representing one of the most important notions of Islam. So suddenly you have an interesting combination between a very, very ultra-modern composition that's suggesting the ability to be very creative, coupled with associations with our past and our principles. And then the components, as I said, the different components of the mosque and the college is suggesting that it's becoming a place for people with the different activities happening there. So I want to end up with suggesting that we need to look at the mosque as a place for the community, and we have to make it a place not only for people to perform rituals, but to meet and to talk and to celebrate and to feel freedom and to feel being proud of their religion and proud of their existence. A place where it can engage different people, not even necessarily Muslims, in a profound and deep spiritual experiences that would transcend all differences. I think also the appearance of the mosque is not that much related to the notion of the dome and the minaret, but it's should be more related to the notion of openness, the notion of how to create a new perception that would encourage people, to even not Muslims, to interact with the mosque. And then how the mosque can be transformed into a place that would enhance sense of belonging between community members. So it seems to me that if I want to end up my presentation with a sort of an alternative mosque design conceptual understanding, I would call for how to transform the mosque into a vibrant place, not a deserted space. I would argue that most of the mosques in the Middle East now, and in a lot of Muslim countries, are becoming deserted places. They are open only to perform rituals. Some Muslim cities, they opened the mosques only during prayer time and they closed it after that. I think we have to be incredibly creative in functions, activities, and different scenarios for users that, as I said, would allow all the generations, all the cultural backgrounds, all the economical backgrounds to re-engage in the mosque, not only to perform rituals, but to regain its value as the real center of the community. We need to claim the mosques spiritually and spatially, and hence the mosque can be transformed from a ritual place to my place. And thank you so much for having me. It was my honor. I think I would stop share here.
Yes. Thank you. That was a really amazing presentation. If it's okay with you, we'd now take a few questions that have been posted into the chat.
Absolutely.
Okay. So there is this one question by Sabah Haroon. It's a two-part question. Would it be possible to retain traditional features such as domes and arches alongside more contemporary designs so that there is unity between mosques all over the world despite their cultural designs? And there's a second part to this question saying, is it possible that a mosque could lose its sense of identity if it didn't retain classic elements alongside new designs? Like a minaret, for example, helps us recognize a mosque and bring people together even if they don't know the place very well.
Yeah, I think Sabah is absolutely right. Very interesting two questions. And I would start by the notion of retaining specific elements. And I think it's not about having elements from the modern or the contemporary time coupled with what she called the classical elements. I think what I was calling for in my lecture is that to look at the mosque not as a rigid, solid piece of architecture. I think we should look at the mosque as a continuation of culture, a continuation of intellectual endeavor, a continuation of a creative process. And hence, there is nothing called classical elements here. I can revisit the element of the minaret. I can revisit the element of the dome. I can look at it from a symbolic view because the function of the element is not, it's not valid anymore. No one is going up the minaret and call for prayer anymore. So it's becoming a symbolic element. When it's becoming a symbolic element, you can look at it from a design point of view and creativity point of view. I think this is also related to the sense of identity, because as I was trying to say also in my lecture, I think we all fall into the trap of looking at identity as a representation of a specific time frame, a specific time era. Egypt, for instance, I am originally from Egypt. Egypt, for instance, they participated in World Expo in Dubai 2021. And the design of the Egyptian pavilion was a sort of a pharaonic temple kind of thing, because again, their interpretation of their identity is that if you want to express Egyptian identity, the best time frame or the best era that you should go to is the pharaonic era or the ancient Egyptians or what have you. So I think I would ask Sabah to look at the notion of dynamic identity, because dynamic identity would allow creativity, and therefore we will totally refrain from the notion of classical elements in mosques. Thank you.
Thank you. There's another question by Aisha. Do you believe that the widespread outsourcing of architects from the West for projects in the Middle East is a factor in the lack of contemporary progression in Islamic architecture? And how can we increase architectural participation from the local Muslim community in Middle Eastern cities?
Well, this is an amazing question, Aisha. And I think this is why all the time I say we have incredible responsibility on our shoulders, Muslim architects and urban designers and planners, because we need to understand, number one, that we have to have incredible confidence. We have to believe in ourselves. We have to understand that we can do excellent contributions to the fabric of our cities on the condition that we deal with architecture and urbanism as creative domains. We take our responsibilities as Muslims to be creative, to use every single element in our contemporary time, every single technology, every single new material, every single discovery, to be aware of all of this and to learn about it and use it in the way we produce architecture and urbanism. And don't be afraid of learning. And at the same time, we have to reject marginalization. I had opportunities here in Qatar to have discussions with people like Ram Koolhaas, like Zaha Hadid, like Novell, and so on and so forth. And all of them were extremely excited about what I call the local knowledge. All of these star architects, they are ignorant about our localities. They are ignorant about local cultures. They are ignorant about our local way of life. And therefore, if we started to believe in ourselves, if we started to fight for our presence in our cities, I think the chances to exhibit our creativity will be limitless, I would say.
There's a lot of questions in the chat about how we can make mosques move towards more inclusivity in their design in terms of being more inclusive to women and marginalized groups? If you could answer that.
Yeah, this is a beautiful question too. And I think I showed you in my lecture number of mosques either in the Middle East or in the West, and I'm talking here about Brussels in Belgium, different cities in Germany, different cities in France, and so on and so forth. And my main problem with all of these examples is that they are creating islands. They are creating isolated spaces and places. They are using stones in a place where the temperature is very cold, and you can use different kind of facades to allow the transparency that I'm talking about. So I would argue that the very, very important step that we should make towards the inclusivity of mosques is by transforming the mosque into an inviting space. And when I say inviting space here, I am not talking about Muslims, because Muslims would search for the mosque, would look it up, would Google it. But the beauty of architecture is for passerby, for people who are walking in the street, for people who are exploring the city or exploring the community, and suddenly they will be in front of a place where it's open, it's inviting, it's packed with activities. They can have tea, they can drink a coffee, they can eat something, they can read a book, they can watch a movie, they can see some paintings in a gallery. This is my vision about the future of the mosque. A mosque that would go beyond the notion of salah. It's not only about salah, it's not only about rituals, but when you start to insert all of these new functions and new elements and new activities in the fabric of the mosque, it will be inclusive by definition, because kids would enjoy the mosque, teenagers would enjoy the mosque, elderly people would enjoy the mosque, families would enjoy the mosque, single people would enjoy the mosque, and so on and so forth. And by doing that, you would also create what I repeatedly said in my lecture, different sense of belonging. Because the mosque is not only a place where you would go to it 10 minutes in 5 times a day to perform praying. No, you will subscribe to it. You will subscribe to it as this is my hangout place. My dream is to have teenagers saying that I want to go to the mosque, not to the mall.
Yes, I completely agree with that. And a very good example of this is the first picture, the picture on the first slide of the 4 young adults, like taking a selfie in front of the mosque. Okay, so we're already 8 minutes over time. I think we won't be able to answer all questions. Maybe let's just take another question. Okay, can mosques be the core of the contemporary Muslim city? How to achieve that, and how will they work along the other urban core elements? You're muted. If you could unmute.
I would definitely agree with the notion that the mosque should be the center of Muslim cities, but not the mosque in its contemporary status, not the mosque as a place to perform salah and perform rituals. If we look at the mosque as the center of the community, as the center of life, as a vibrant place, as a place where knowledge is transmitted, where knowledge is produced, where social interaction is happening, where inclusivity is attained, then this is the center of the city and the center of the community. If we kept on building mega mosques and independent mosques and isolated mosques and mosques, fortified mosques, I quoted fortified mosques because of the walls and all these solid appearances that would disencourage you from creating a connection with the different spaces of the mosque. If we do that, definitely the mosque would be the center, because as I said in my lecture also, that was the original essence of the role of the mosque in the Muslim cities, in the Muslim community. It was the center. Why it was the center? Because its function, its role, its attachment to people went by far beyond the notion of Salah. It was the cultural center, it was the social center, it was the economical center. It's directly attached to the souk and the market. It's directly attached to the public space where people celebrate and enjoy their time. So literally, this trilogy is the center of the city.
To end, I think a fitting question is this one. So if for a second we leave the Islamophobia and Mosquephobia emerging in the world and look at the representation of mosques exactly similar to the representation of churches or temples, do you think that their representation of the churches and the gurdwaras should also adapt, needs to adapt with the changing times as well?
Yes, my answer is absolutely yes. And actually, the same discourse is happening also when it comes to church and temples. In a lot of countries around the world, from Thailand to the Western community, a lot of people are questioning the meaning of building yet more churches, or why we build more temples. If the role of these places will only for performing rituals. But the irony here is that it's not only about questioning religious building. In the case of Muslims, in addition to questioning religious buildings, we are questioning the religion itself. And therefore, we have Islamophobia and Moscophobia. We definitely have churchophobia and we have temple phobia, but we don't have yet Christian phobia or Jewish phobia or what have you. But unfortunately, because of the process that I talked about, the Islamophobia was globally and locally constructed and globally and locally consumed, and therefore we are fighting in two foregrounds.
Completely agree with you there. So I think we've already shot 12 minutes over time. So thank you so much, Ali, for presenting for us today. It was very interesting and informative. I'm sure everybody enjoyed the session. I think we're going to wrap up here. If you have any last words before we wrap up the session.
I enjoyed it, and it was really great, and I'm so grateful for you and for the school. Thank you so much. And I am grateful also for the people that huge, more than 100. This is amazing. Thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you.